Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Heart of Games, designing, embodying, and celebrating emotions in TTRPGs. And I'm excited and sad. So let's get to the hosts. I believe Connie is first up. Why don't you introduce yourself? Oh yeah, and I'm Jason Pitt, Genesis of Legend Publishing. I'm your moderator. He, him.
Absolutely. Hey, thank you for that introduction, Jason. I'm Connie. My pronouns are they, he, and she. I'm really excited to be on this panel tonight with you all. What's up, Big Bad Con 2021? You might recognize me as the GM and producer behind Trans, a planar RPG. I'm repping our merch right here. We are an all transgender people of color led 100% homebrew Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition live streamed actual play campaign set in an original non-colonial anti-Orientalist world. We stream Saturdays at 3 p.m. U.S. Central Time on Twitch at Trans Planar RPG. Trans as in transgender, planar as in interplanar travel, and RPG, you know the acronym. You're here. We're all about it. When I'm not being the GM behind Transplanar RPG, I'm a game designer, a budding game designer, and I'm so honored to be joined by these incredible designers on this panel with me. Let's dig right into emotions and games. I'm all about it. I'm going to pass the torch on to Kristin.
Thanks, Connie. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristin, she, her pronouns. I'm also super excited to be here. I got to attend Big Bad 2019 in person, and I am thrilled that we are back, even if it's virtual. The vibes, the love, the support, it's all still here, so I'm really excited. I am a tabletop role-playing game designer, writer, podcaster, and live streamer. I am really excited to be with this amazing group of humans to talk all about emotions. And I will pass it over to Jay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jay Dragon. I am a game designer and publisher. I don't use pronouns, but I am excited to be here, and ideally less sad than Jason. You might know me from Wanderhome or Sleepaway. I co-run Possum Creek Games with my business partner, and I try to make cool queer games that hit on feelings and stuff. Jammi, your turn.
Hello. So I'm Jamila R. Nedjadi. You can call me Jammi. I endeavor to be one of the many himbos in the TTRPG space. So I'm here to support and to cheer everybody on. I like to make games. Some people say too many games. They are correct. I have been slowing down a bit though, but you can check out my itch.io page. I have 40 plus games, and 60 of them have feelings in them. That's how the math works out. Extra emotions, right? So I'm really, really excited. Jason and I are working together on Once More Into the Void, which has a lot of feelings. Jay Dragon and I are working on a ghosty game, which also has a lot of feelings. Kristin and I will be working on a game that will have feelings. So, Connie, you're next. You are on my list.
I'm on your list. Checking me off.
But yeah, so we're going to get into the heart of games. We are designing, embodying, and celebrating emotions in TTRPGs. So basically, in recent years, indie game designers, actual play streamers, and more gaming tables are incorporating and entering emotions and centering emotions that drive great games. So our panelists will discuss how we make games, how we run games and play games that tap into emotions, and where we're headed to in the future. So basically, I'd like to start us off with a really broad question of how do we center and celebrate emotions in our play style as a GM or as a player, right? And so I'm going to, just for the sake of predictability, I'm a Capricorn and I appreciate predictability. We're going to go in the same order, right? So Connie, you are, of course, Transplanar is like absolutely amazing, right? You are a fantastic GM. You are also a fantastic player who is very cooperative when I use emotional daggers on you, like in our BALIKBAYAN game, right? So
stab me. I'm your knife block. Use me.
Yes. I love playing with you so much. So it's my dream to be in Transplanar also. So how do you center and celebrate emotions in your playstyle as a GM or as a player?
That's a great question. So I'm coming from an actual play GMing perspective. So a lot of my perspective might not apply for home games. But if you're interested in streaming, or if you're interested in, I think something that some home games and actual play scenarios share is if you're attracted to tables with a strong plot, a strong story, a strong narrative, then my perspective might apply to you. So my experience is coming from running a lot of PBTA games, specifically Masks, Urban Shadows, Monster Hearts 2, and also D&D 5th edition. But there's like a running joke in my tables that the D&D 5th edition I run is like not recognizable as D&D at all.
I also get that. So
yeah, for sure. I think there's a lot of common hearts here. So something that I carry with me a lot is this quote, is this saying that years from now, someone won't remember what you said to them or what you did to them, but they will remember how you made them feel. And that really resonates with me as a GM. And it's really important to me to ground my prep and my GMing in emotion and to find that emotional core of whatever story I'm telling with my players, right? And I find that the parts of, the various campaigns I run that audiences resonate with most aren't the parts where we're doing math or arbitrating rules, but the characters, right? The role play, the emotions that come up, these human stories told in fantastical settings. Right? Because in specificity, we can find universality. So in a more, I suppose, granular sense, the encounters I design when I prep, like, oh, what are the PCs going to be doing this session, is almost always based around stuff that's immediately relevant to my PC's emotional states in some way or another, right? I'm someone who's kind of, especially for my actual play stuff, like I'm pretty anti-random encounters. Even the quote unquote random encounters aren't really random. I'm like, ooh, this horrible nightmare beast is suddenly attacking you in your dreams and pulling up memories of your worst failures. Oh, how random. Actually, they're really...
Wow,
really,
there's an
it was
option on the
all
table for that.
Exactly. To give an example, in the most recent Transplaner episode, which was today, because I just streamed today earlier in the day, one of my players, who's this awesome blood hunter, this is the 5th edition, and this like disgraced prince, they returned back to their home after 7 years of exile. And every single episode in this arc so far was full of stuff that spoke to that, right? Like that was clearly the emotional hook that my player was like holding out to me. And they're like, please put some bait on this hook, please, please. And I'm like, you got it, C, I will do it. You're asking for it, so I'll do it. So we just recently had like a horrible family reunion episode where they got to see each of their siblings that they hadn't seen in 7 years, how they'd grown, how they'd changed. Like a 7-year-old kid was now 14, right? And she was doing her first sword demonstration like during a garden party. Huge deal, right? And each sibling, each person that they'd left behind now had different reactions to them. And it was important to me as a GM to highlight what had transformed about their hometown and what had stayed the same. And to give my player room to express their feelings about that in character, right? So it's important to me when I'm prepping to sit down and think like, what is the heart of this episode? Is this going to be a horrible family reunion? And what are the that's the premise. So how can I deliver on the promise of that premise to my players? If they're signing up for a horrible family reunion episode, I want to give them that drunk aunt in the corner. I want to give them that, that like uncle who like does weird shit, on the low. I'm also sorry, I don't know what the swearing protocol is like here. So if it's like PG,
I don't know either.
Can I very quickly?
Let's run with the PG-13 so
PG-13.
everyone gets one F-bomb.
Okay.
I used up our S word. I'm so sorry.
All right, that's all right. That's all right.
it was worth it. It was worth it.
It was worth it.
Yeah. But that's the example I can give. And I guess that's all in terms of me for like how I center and celebrate emotions. That's just really the heart of everything I do, right? I'm like, who cares about math so much? Let's tell an interesting and emotionally engaging story together as players, as a GM, for our audience.
Yeah. And I think it's a good point that you bring up, right? Because you were talking about the NPCs, like providing those hooks, like creating the boundaries of that space for the players, right? So Connie, as a follow-up question, I wanted to ask, like, how do you decide like what emotion an NPC is going to embody for your PCs?
A lot of that work is done off camera. It's important to me to be in constant communication with my players about their character arcs and about where they're interested in where those will go. We don't plan an end state because I do also strongly believe in playing to find out. But we do like plan on doing certain scenes. For example, I run a mini series called The Hounds of Mercy, also on Transplanar RPG, on BIMPOC, by the way. And something I'll do before every session, I'll be like, what are scenes y'all want to have, right? And like a player might be like, I want to have a scene with this other character to process the apocalypse that just happened, or like I want to have a scene with this character where we flirt, you know, even though it's bad for us, right? Or like I want to have a scene with this character where we wake up in each other's bed like the morning after and we go, oh my god, what just happened, right? And like those are interesting seeds, right? And they all have an emotional core somehow. And I set the scene and I let them go for it. You know what I mean? And I take notes during, I take notes after to see how I can expand upon those scenes and make sure those threads are, I think, like followed through upon in subsequent episodes.
Wow, that's really amazing. Like you're such a stellar GM, Connie.
Oh,
So but yeah, I love that so much. So Kristin, how about you? Like how do you like to embody or celebrate emotions in your playstyle as a GM or as a player?
Yeah, well, it's kind of good luck that I'm following Connie because I have way more experience as a player than I do as a GM. And when I first started playing tabletop role-playing games, I did not embody emotion. I came to the table, I made like a badass female. I was concerned about the armor she was wearing and the 2 swords she was carrying and how many heads she was going to chop off that session, right? Those are the games that we're playing. And once I kind of realized that emotions could be either part of that or completely different games I could play that had emotions, then it became way more interesting to me. And so, so I really try to lean into who my character is, how they would react to something emotionally. And even if me as the player is like, oh, this might not be the right choice. If my character is in the middle of an emotional situation, then I'm going to go with what my character would think. So I think a good example is our ongoing Blades game, Jammi. Jammi being the fantastic GM that he is and giving out so many NPCs, simply asked me this question about one NPC, like, when did you realize I'm pretty sure Jammi leaned in, when did you realize you were in love with him? And now 7 sessions later, we have this backstory of how he left me and then I left him. And like, it just makes everything so much richer. And I mean, that's not the entire game. We're playing Blades. We're still going on scores. We're still getting stuff done. But we always have this like underlying current of, but that's someone you care about, which means it's not as easy to walk away or to do that heist because now you have these personal connections with these NPCs and it starts to really mean something.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point you bring up about like, even if it's not the most optimal thing, right, to do, even if it's not the best thing to do. One of my favorite things is like when someone asks me, oh, how much do I want my character to suffer? Right? It's like, it's like one of my questions.
So you already know the answer to that, yeah.
Yeah, as much as possible, right? So, but Kristin, what gave you permission to like, so a lot of players feel pressure to always do the optimal thing, right? So what helped you gain that permission to be like, I'm just going to be truer to the emotion of my character and not worry about the optimal thing?
Yeah. 2 things. One, playing long enough to realize that you should play how you want to play, as long as it's safe, right? You play how you want to play. I think for a long time, I wanted to do that, but I always felt like I had to do the right thing or not do the dangerous or outgoing thing. And then also playing with other people who did those things, right? Knowing who I'm playing with and playing with folks, having GMs like Jammi, like Connie, who encourage that helps bring it out in people as well.
Yeah. So it's really important to have folks who also enjoy that sort of thing, for sure, right? Yeah. So, Jay, I, of course, would love to throw the question at you. How do you center and celebrate emotions in your playstyle as a GM or a player?
Oh, you know I haven't played games in like 2 years. No, I actually have an actual answer to this.
What a flex. I love it.
No, not a flex. Oh my god. I've just been at home like I feel like I only play test these days. Anyway.
That's playing. I'll argue that's playing. Because if not, I'm not playing.
No, I have an answer. I just when I was younger, I got started in this whole biz playing LARPs with kids, running and playing LARPs with kids. And I did that for like 5 or 6 years before I ever did tabletop. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, playing with kids is a very humbling experience. And the reason for that is because you can be 14 years old, right? And you are having a profoundly emotional experience where you're like figuring out your gender, and you're like sitting under the stars, and you're like weeping into the arms of the only person who loved you. And then like 10 feet away is some 8-year-old wiping their sword in poison ivy and like yelling about being named Aragorn Beastlord Shadow the Third. And both of those are true, right? And so running games with kids, it gives you a really unique perspective on emotions, because I think that there is this idea as adults that we need the permission to express emotion. I think that is true as adults, but I think that with kids, when you're playing games with kids, and for me, a lot of my game design kind of comes first and foremost like, how can I get adults to start thinking like kids? And oftentimes where I land is that it's almost like the longest running D&D campaign I ever played was in college. I ran it for 4 years. And the first semester of it was like hex crawl fighting monsters wandering through the woods kind of game. But over the course of it, people became more and more attached to their characters, who are these children exploring this fantasy world. And they fell into it. And by the end of it, they were like sobbing over their characters. And I think the secret is that like, we want to have emotions over things, right? Like emotions to me, I never want to be in a position where I am dictating or demanding emotion. I think oftentimes because then it's not, the emotion doesn't have weight to it. It's just a demand. But I think a really exciting thing about games is the way that they almost become these like doors into emotion, where we can have like emotion becomes kind of this guiding force that kind of tethers our other experiences together and informs them and enriches them. And so you can play a game with people who truly are having the least emotional experience a human being can have. But it's not a matter of like, oh, how do I make them cry? It's just, how do I get them in there? How do I get them to embody it? Because once they figure out I'm invested in this, once they figure out what about the character brings them to life, they start falling into the rest of it. And then next thing you know, it's those kids who were a few years ago hitting bushes with swords. They're now the ones crying over the death of their best friend or whatever. So like, that's to me a lot of it.
Wow, I really feel that sense of history in your games for sure, right? Like that is so super. I was gonna ask you a follow-up question, but you kept answering it like psychically because we're that way. So I have no follow-up questions for you in that regard. But yeah, for my own experience and how I center and celebrate emotions and play style, I used to be mostly a GM, but in the last 2 years, it's gotten to be pretty even, which is very cool. And I think what I wanted to bring up today is I try to be as vulnerable and open as a GM, as a player, as I want other people to be, right? So that it sort of helps create that space. So I want to bring up a specific example as a GM where I had a player who would keep mentioning, so we were playing Changing the Lost PBTA hack, which Lowell Francis is working on with Sherry Stewart. And so there was a player, they kept bringing up like, because changelings escape their Fae masters, right? And so he kept bringing up the Fae master, and there was like a hint that there was like some sort of like very intense, relationship between the master and the changeling from the past. But I could tell like it was super important to him because he kept bringing it up, right? So I was really like, I feel like I have to have this person show up, but it could be potentially really dangerous, right? So we checked in first with safety, and I think that's a great tool to ensure emotions are at play, to have those things at the table. And then so the player was having a scene with another character, and then when they went back into the house, the question I asked was, how is it that you know that your former master is in the room with you right now? And then so it gave him like a chance to like acclimatize because he has the power to tell me what's going on, but he also has time to figure out what's going on. And the whole time that the scene was playing out, I was playing a master who would say things like, "Oh, I've missed you so much. You were my favorite. You were always so perfect and so beautiful. I still love you." And then I would say, "But you know that he's lying," like over and over again. And so that is a thing that I try to do, where I will always be honest with the players. I will always be very clear about what's going on and tell them, you know that he's lying, or you know that they're hiding from something from you, or you know that they want to tell you something, but they're waiting for that permission from you. And so I try to play a character that's very vulnerable and open, no matter how like antagonistic or supportive the NPC is, because I'm trying to bear my heart on the line as well. Right. So I was like really shaking. Like you can see the YouTube video and I look so confident, but I was like shaking on the inside, like going like, oh my gosh, I'm waiting for that X card to show up any moment. Right. Like just in case. So, but yeah. And yeah, actually that's a really good point. Like I feel like we're kind of going into the territory of bleed, right? So like where we're talking about internally. Do we want to speak on the topic, right? Like what do we think about bleed and when it shows up in a game?
I have some thoughts on bleed, which admittedly are very LARP informed, but also I want to acknowledge first off that my perspective on bleed is very different from most people, but I think a lot about like dissonance and emotion, and how I think like sorry, someone's mic was making noise and now it's not anymore, and that's throwing me off. That threw me off way more than the mic noise. But there was I think a lot about like sort of like bleed is this feeling, right, when you play something emotional and you still feel something afterwards. And I've seen two really great approaches to bleed, or two very different approaches to bleed. And one of them, I think, is very emblematic of the culture we live in, and the other one is, I think, much more valuable. One approach to bleed, and for those who don't know, bleed is where, it's where you play a game and you're still feeling those intense emotions afterwards, and like your character is bleeding into the one you embody now. And the approach I see very often is, how do you get rid of bleed? Which I personally think is a really horrible approach. I think that is a model of repression, because what you are effectively saying, like, how do I stop myself from feeling these feelings that I am feeling? If the game makes you feel happy or sad, yeah, that's happening. You can't ask yourself, how do I not feel it? And I think that what is much more valuable, and I think what people have started to kind of approach with, is this attitude of, how do I integrate bleed, right? Like, if we acknowledge, right, that a game leaves you in an emotional, vulnerable state, it's like, all right, well, afterwards, we need to sit with that. We need to help you. We need to care for you. And models of care and models of like, basically like, like you went through something incredibly emotionally impactful. And whether or not the impact is like the aftershocks, or if it's that emotion is still actively present even as you leave the circle, it's still like I think part of centering emotions is also ensuring that when the emotions manifest, they're not treated with dismissal. They are given space to breathe. And that's kind of my hot bleed take, as someone who's had to comfort a lot of 16-year-olds who are dealing with bleed. We call it something different at camp, but it's the same thing, and I've seen it a lot, and that's my feeling on it.
Just a definitional thing. There's two kinds of bleed. Bleed in, where what's happening from your character is affecting the player, and bleed out, where what the player's feeling is affecting the character.
Well,
it's useful to be aware of the fact that it goes both directions. I've had a bad day at the office, so my character's angry is a different design bit from my character is having a divorce, so now I feel terrible.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, and I don't want to argue there, Jason. I just think that your character is always your character as like your little homunculus child that sits in front of you is in a lot of ways kind of always an extension of yourself. It is always a portion of yourself that you are actualizing. It is always autobiographical. And so I think that I guess I've never thought about the distinction simply because I don't think of those as it's not a two-way street. It's that you have this being inside of you, and sometimes that being goes through things that still impact you later. Like, I get bleed from intense video games. There's no role play involved. I can play Papers, Please, though, for 10 hours, and then afterwards I feel something. That I think is bleed.
10 hours of Papers, Please feels.
Yeah, that's something to you. That changes a girl. Yeah. So that's my hot bleed take. Thank you all for coming to my seminar, my hot bleed take.
Perfect. We're so glad we could be here. No, but that is so beautifully said, and I think this sort of like shifts us into the next question I want to ask, because I will jump in a little because I think bleed and game design are connected. So one thing that I like to design emotional games, I do design games that I don't want to say demand emotion. I don't think it's that, but I do design games that center emotion, where emotions are not optional, right? And relationships with characters and things are not optional. My personal hot take is that when those things are optional, we are being cowardly. but anyway, so either put them in or take them out, but don't make them optional. So, because if I'm in a game where violence is not optional, then my relationship should not be optional. But anyway, back on topic. So what I like to do, so in games like Apocalypse Keys, for example, where it gets super messy, gets super emotional. It has been lovingly called the Monster Hearts version of the BPRD and Hellboy, and I think that's accurate. And so definitely what I did is that in order to like tally XP, you actually have to wait until the end of the session and go over some questions together, right? And those questions are like, did I learn something significant about myself or another monster? And other questions like, did I learn something significant about myself or my impending ruin? Like, what's waiting for my monster? And it's really, I built that in so it's an opportunity to sort of adjust for and look at the bleed, right? So people can decide what they want to do with it. I think it's a good point you bring up, Jay, that getting rid of it is a sign of repression, is a sign of like, oh, this is bad, right? Instead of just allowing people to like sit with it. I think that's really beautiful. I just want to give a reflective space, right? So that it gives you a chance to like decide on your own terms what to do with that bleed, what to do with those emotions. But yeah, okay, so we have a really interesting question.
Do we maybe want to save, if I may, save the chat questions for the end? Because I really want to get to your questions. And I'm really excited about those.
Thank you. Oh my gosh.
I love bleed. Okay. I don't want to talk about bleed for ages, especially when I'm the only one on the panel who's willing to die on this hill. And
I'm with you.
Support you.
Jay.
We're support you.
my little army.
Yeah. But yeah, let's definitely talk about centering and celebrating emotions in your game design, because I definitely want to hear it. Connie, you're doing some exciting things with good stuff like the God Killer RPG. I'm like dying to play it. Yes. So Connie, tell me how you incorporate emotions in your game design.
Yeah. You know what? Yeah, I'll take it. Why not? So yeah. I was like, I kind of want to listen to like J Dragon talk first, or Kristin, but I'm like, you know what? Let's go for it. Let's jump into it.
Go do it.
So God Killer, I guess to understand my approach, you kind of have to understand the game a little bit. It's a PBTA hack, I guess, holy punk, for one GM, God, and one player, the God Killer, and it's basically the overall setting of this game is in this like post-apocalyptic, divinely, magically irradiated wasteland where gods walk amongst mortals. Magic is a finite resource, and gods are immortal. Mortals can't kill them, can't touch them, but gods cannibalize each other and eat each other for power, pleasure, just for fun, but everything changes when the player arises. The God Killer emerges, and you are the only mortal in the entire world that can actually kill and hurt a god. So it's important to me that like why are the PCs important is answered in the premise of the game itself, first of all. And also, I just had this idea, right? And I was like sitting at my like desk, like journaling and brainstorming. And I'm like, okay, where's this game gonna go? Right? Like, why am I using like a PBTA framework in the first place too? And it was mostly because that was the framework I was most comfortable GMing and playing in, and was the one I was most I guess familiar with, right? And then I started like reading some other texts, because that's how I always like approach designing a game first. Emotions are just kind of a given, right? Like it's not even something I think about. I'm like, it's just a baseline assumption that this game is gonna be hella emotional, and when I eventually run it for my partner, we're both gonna be sobbing at the table, right? That's just something I completely embrace and accept. I'm like, okay, that's a given. What else can I like put into this to make that come out in a way that, first of all, is clear in the text, and also like feels safe to read? Safer to read through and play through than something that is like completely, I suppose, like unfacilitated, right?
Mhm.
Like instead of like having a rule that's just sort of like, oh, your character can just die in a super pointless and dumb way, even though you spend like hours creating them. I feel like that does encourage emotion, but it can be kind of like a negative emotion, or like it just, there's some sort of dissonance between what I'm expecting my play experience to be and how the rules are written. So it's important to me that like the pieces of the rules here in Godkiller help supplement a kind of emotional experience that I would want to put myself through as a GM and the player I'm designing my game in the mind for, which is my partner. So for example, like a mechanic I'm fiddling with is this idea that you can't die. You straight up can't die. But you can inflict so much violence around you. And like a central question of this game is this idea that power doesn't corrupt, it reveals, right? So like, what will you use as the God Killer? Like, what will you use your power to do? And like trying to make that come through in the mechanics. You know, I'm sort of like poaching conditions from masks and like fiddling with them a little bit more. So like you can write in your conditions sort of like in Monster Hearts 2, but like giving a little bit more structure by like having like a pre-generated list you can pick from if you're kind of at a loss. This idea that you can use your conditions to empower your mechanics. So you can choose to have, I don't know, I have like rules open. I don't know, see if I can scroll down to one. You can choose to be haunted. You can choose to be humiliated and obsessed, and you can use those tags on your rolls to always push it in a positive direction for you, quote unquote positive in an optimal way.
I love those as conditions so much more than I love masks conditions. By the way, sorry not to interrupt you.
No, you're good. You're
I
good.
just wanted to
good.
say that humiliated and obsessed are so, because a quick sidebar, I always have disliked how like anger and like fear are things that like are very centered. Humiliated and obsessed and such are things that happen to you, and they're like emotional states that kind of feel much more inflicted. So it feels much better mechanically. I just like that. I'm sorry, I really like that. Carry on.
So good.
You're good. No, I have to honestly, I have to credit Jammi for obsessed, because I think I read that in a play test that I was playing through Apocalypse Keys, and I was like, that's dope. I'm gonna use that. Like, not gonna lie. I was reading through Wanderhome as a huge inspiration for a lot of the mechanics. I was like, the pick lists blew me out of the freaking water. I was like, this is insane. This is emotion baked into the text, right? This idea of like
100%.
like locations having a personality. Like everyone buy Wanderhome right now. Everyone go on itch and buy Wanderhome right now by J Dragon.
Dude, it was 1 month of writing the pick lists and 6 months of editing the pick lists. I swear to God.
Listen, it comes through so clearly. Every single option has its own theme, has its own history. That's just, I guess maybe this is a good opportunity to transition over to J Dragon about like your game design, because I feel like I'm just sort of like blah, which reflects the state that Godkiller is in right now as well. It's kind of blah. I
adore the blah. Don't even worry. I think for me, a thing I think a lot about is that there are many different ways of, what does it mean to center emotions, right? And I think one approach. So I'm gonna, there's a concept in like critical theory of like, or like in paradigms of like, you've got the thesis, you've got the antithesis, and you have the synthesis. So you have, this initial paradigm, this initial world, you have this reactionary challenge to that world, and then you have this emergent thing that takes both as a given. So for example, we might, describe that in the world we exist today as like, there's the colonial framework, the anti-colonial framework, and the post-colonial framework, right? Where you've got the oppressive society, the thing that reactionarily opposes it, and something new that gets to emerge from it. And a thing that a lot of great folks, including like Kazumi, have talked about is, I think probably Jammi too have talked about, is the idea that like when you center something, that doesn't mean necessarily like if you wanted to center anti-capital, or if you wanted to center like a non-capitalist world, if you wanted to make that really critical, framing your game as anti-capitalist, where you're railing against the issues of capitalism, is an approach, but ultimately you're centering capitalism. When you write a game that spends its text saying capitalism is bad, you're not writing a game about communism or anarchism, you're writing a game about capitalism. And that's okay. That's fine. There are very valuable things to be said when you are centering capitalism. Like that's still a valuable place to have a conversation in. But I think oftentimes my goal is, what does it mean to center just something else, right? Like what if like the conversation comes from a place where emotions are the default and the game is getting built with the assumption that we're on this emotional page. And like even I wrote a game recently called In the Time of Monsters, which is like a crunchy 4th edition inspired tactical combat game. And it's very emotions driven. It's wildly emotions driven because, and it doesn't say anywhere in the text, like, this is a game about feelings. These are the feelings the text will make you have. Like, it's not trying to like rally you into an emotional state. It's just like, here are the rules of the game. Like, and you play it and you're like, wow, I feel complex things about this world I'm in. And that's kind of how it like tricks you, right? Like, it not even tricks you. That's just how it is when there's a game that centers feeling in a way that's like not like, this is a game, like I'm gonna like, kind of reject non-feeling, right? Because that's oftentimes I think what we want to do, which is important too. But instead, this is a game about feeling, and once you're standing at feeling, where do you go next? I guess is critical to me.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's such an important thing. Like, what are we centering, right? Because I love Bluebeard's Bride. It's one of my favorite games. But when people call it a feminist game, I go like, no, I think it's a game about the patriarchy. Right? Like, I don't think it's a feminist game. But that's my
that's okay, right? Like it can be a game about the patriarchy. But that's what kind of that's a cool space to play in. But yeah, I'm there with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Kristin, how about you? Like, how do you want to like embody and center emotions in your game design?
Yeah, Connie and Jay gave such fantastic examples about centering. And so I heard you also ask about what challenges that can bring on. So I'll just move over to that.
Hell yeah.
So I think for me, when I am going to design a game, when I have an idea for a game, it always starts with, I want to make this game because this is how I want to feel when I play it. And then this is the space or the playground I want to create that will inspire others to have similar feelings. Because again, we don't typically demand a specific emotion from folks, but to create that space. And so I think one of the challenges is then holding true to that feeling and finding out everything that goes around it. So the right mechanics, because like if I work with my partner and I'll say, well, I'm really going down this route. Like, I really think it could be a PBTA game, and they'll have a response. And I'll say, no, because that takes away from this core, right? This core emotion that I started with. And so I think that one of the challenges for me anyway, as a designer, is having that initial emotion or many emotions most of the time, and then trying to stay true to it through the whole design playtest process.
Ooh, yeah. And sometimes it can take a while to like really refine and focus on that. Right.
Absolutely.
For sure. Yeah. And I think, going off of the challenges, right? Because like, I think Connie and Jay like summarized so many awesome concepts that also guide my own game design, is, I think the biggest challenge is that I do have a lot of people who celebrated, had so much fun with the emotional play of Apocalypse Keys, but then, and this is also colored by the fact that I am a marginalized person, and so because of that, as a femme-perceived person of color, my games will just have more criticism focused on it. Everyone here can relate to that. But yeah, like Apocalypse Keys got a lot of pushback for being super emotional, right? And so like that was considered one of the bad things about the game. And so that like created this whole thing where I really had to sit down and talk to Sean of Evo Hat. Like Sean really helped me work through this. So did a lot of folks. People from Asians Represent, like Connie and Agatha and Daniel, were so supportive of Apocalypse. It's such a great game. But yeah, and so I think like the biggest challenge of focusing on emotions and bringing it to gameplay is really staying the course, right? Because this is so, I don't even think emotions are that new in indie games, but I think understanding it as the default, right? Like it not being just fringe indie RPG design is still new to a lot of people, which surprises me, right? Because in a lot of the spaces I play, that's what we love to celebrate and focus on. So I think the biggest challenge is like staying the course and really like understanding why is it important to me as a game designer, why I center emotions. Yeah, and so that's definitely what I like to, and I feel like it's made me a stronger game designer to have more faith in my game design and what it does. So the newest playbook that I'm working on for Apocalypse Keys is called The Hungry, and I pour all of myself in all of my game design, but I think I poured a lot of myself into The Hungry. So that was a really, really fun. There's a lot of body horror built into that playbook. Like, you know, just fair warning, right? So, but if anyone knows me, they know
I'm
that's
shocked.
Yeah, Kristin, you are like subjected to so much of that body horror in our Blades game. But yeah, so I think we have a few questions, right?
Yes,
so,
we do.
Yeah, so Jason, yeah.
So there are two questions that it would be lovely if folks could answer. We got three. So
8 minutes and 2 questions. 3 questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the questions available. Let's go. Everyone gets a chance to answer one of these questions, and then
Round.
and then we'll get your coordinates so people know where they can follow you. So the first one is Bleed an ensemble situation, or is it purely on an individual knowing how to take care of themselves?
Both. We exist in a society, my dudes. We are an individual in an ecosystem, in a social group, in a community. Our personal feelings also exist on a community and ecosystem level. My guy, I don't know. It's all the same. That's my answer.
Question 2. If you know what feeling you want to elicit, how do you figure out what game element will accomplish that feeling?
We both inhaled.
Go for it. Go first.
Maybe we can tag team it. Mine's quick. I think trial and error and knowing other games, play, read lots and lots of other games. That way, when you have a feeling, you typically are going to go, oh, this makes me feel like this game, right? And I think that helps you pick a system or a mechanic. So lots of playing, lots of reading.
Yeah, and mine is just I think about what do my players do at the table? Like, what are they actually going to be doing? An example, some moves that, you know, a PC could invoke in Godkiller at any time would be like Indulge a Vice, Flashback to a Trauma, Flaunt Your Power, Flinch, Hesitate, or Stall. And these are all emotionally loaded. These are all like, oh, okay, I'm kind of a crappy person. These are the crappy things I'm going to be doing. But they all go somewhere, right? And each of them are more guided in the actual text of the rules. That's it. I'm going to pass it on.
And I'm just going to tag team off what Connie said. There's also interface elements. So, for instance, Dread, the physical tension of a Jenga tower that's going to fall gives you the emotion of dread due to the interface. Similarly, Bluebeard's Bride with Shiver and Fear is when the player has an interaction, has a physical action, this triggers in the fiction. So there's a lot of what the player is doing hooks into the emotions that they will be feeling.
When I was in high school, I ran a LARP that was where I borrowed a bunch of my chemistry teacher's equipment and bought 2-pound bags of copper sulfate, and I had a bunch of campers do unethical and unsafe chemistry experiments where they set copper sulfate on fire in order to simulate the process of creating a philosopher's stone. So don't do that. But that is an example of where I was in real life and I experienced a thing. And I was like, wow, this experience makes me feel like a wizard. How can I give this to everyone else? And sometimes that's what a game is.
All right. And the last question. What field, hobby, or discipline outside of RPGs do you take inspiration from for emotional design that might be unexpected?
Yeah, so for me, actually, I take a lot from my practice as a tarot reader. So before I went into game design full time, I was a full-time tarot reader and Reiki practitioner for about, I want to say like 7 years, and I still do tarot and Reiki and all that other stuff. I'm a Reiki shaman. So I take a lot of that from, because tarot is a reflective practice. It's one where you really like get to see yourself, right, through the cards, because there isn't any power in the cards. It's all on you, right? And so it's in your interpretation. And those skills of interpretation, intuition, improvisation that draw naturally from who you are and emotions. I bring that into my game design and into my gameplay a lot. So it's something that really informs it. I will also say that my obsession with watching films, cartoons, and taking it apart as mechanics has also really helped. So, like, play masks, watch Teen Titans, take it apart, that kind of thing, right? So, you're going to say, Jay?
All right, so let's
let's
start the outros. So let people know where they can find you online and or give you money. So let's start with Connie.
You got it. Real fast answer to that last question. My inspirations, poetry and dance. I'm Connie. My pronouns are they, he, and she. You can find me on Twitter at @ByConnieChang. That's BYCONNIECHANG. By is in the authorial sign-off, not the sexuality, though I am both. I'm the GM and executive producer behind Transplanar RPG. We're an all-trans, POC-led D&D 5th edition live-streamed actual play campaign. Saturdays at 3 p.m. U.S. Central Time, Transplanar RPG. Toss us a follow on Twitter and Twitch. And that's it. I'm going to pass things along to Kristin.
Thanks, Connie. Hi, Kristin, she, her pronouns. You can find me on Twitter at Kristin is no Jedi. I design tabletop role-playing games with my partner at diceupgames.com or at diceupgames on Twitter. And I also have a interview podcast that I do where I interview folks who have tabletop gaming crowdfunding projects coming out. I've interviewed lots of wonderful folks this year as a way to help hype and get the word out about their projects, including Jammi. We talked about our haunt recently. So you can listen to that at Tabletop Babble on the Geekspective Network. And I'll go ahead and pass it to Jay.
Hi, my name is Jay. My name is Jay Dragon. Wow. I just brains crossed wires there. You can find me on Twitter. I am the most notable Jay Dragon on Twitter. You can also find my company on Patreon, patreon.com/Possum Creek. You can check out our website, Possum Creek Games. We have a ton of great stuff there, including we are also currently in the process of running a Kickstarter with Jammi, Our Haunt, which is a delightful game about ghosts. We are trying to get to 40,000 in the next 9 days. So if you want to pitch in, now's a great time. There's a haunted doll at the highest tier. And additionally, I wrote Wanderhome. You can get Wanderhome there. PossumCreekGames.com for all your games-related needs.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'm Jammi. Thank you so much for joining, everybody. My pronouns are they, he. I am your beloved himbo and queer cheerleader. I am here for all of us to succeed in TTRPGs. You can find me at patreon.com/ShortCoonGames if you would like to support me, and you can check out temporalhiccup.itch.io if you want to see all the games that I've worked on. So thank you so much, panelists. I want to say thank you for joining us. You were all absolutely fantastic. This is such a great experience.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Oh,
I'm no longer sad.
Just excited.